Welcome to Focused on Forward. The purpose of this podcast is to focus on recovery from life situations, be it a disease, chronic or acute, perhaps the loss of someone so dear to you in death, or a change of life patterns that has affected you so profoundly that you have no choice but to find your new normal and become focused on moving forward. Each episode is designed to show the positivity that people bring to each and every one of their stories, the successes they've had, ways that they have become so definitively focused on moving forward. We look forward to sharing their stories, and we hope that they inspire you just as much as they have inspired us. Thanks for listening, and enjoy the show. Hello, and welcome to Focused on Forward. Today I have the absolute pleasure of talking with Maria Daniels. Now, Maria is someone that I got to know a little bit through last year with a group called Indie Pods United, and she was one of the co-hosts of the Indie Pods, and I saw her on there a lot, and they were kind enough to let me come on and talk about this show, exactly, Focused on Forward, and how I got to become a podcaster and our own backstory. But Maria's here today, and we're going to have a really nice conversation with her. Maria has a backstory of her own that also ties into the name of her show, Successfully Chaotic, because some of her life has been chaotic, but she has become a success in spite of it. So we're interested to see how Maria has become focused on forward in her life and see how her story can help us. So Maria, thank you very much for being on our show today.
It's an absolute pleasure to be here, Tim.
Excellent. So what I'll do, Maria, is I'm just going to step back. I'm going to let you tell your story, and I'll jump in every now and then.
Absolutely. So first of all, I was kind of laughing a little bit, chuckling to myself when you said that I have a backstory, because obviously we all have a backstory, right? And some of our backstories are a little more colorful than others. As you mentioned, I do have a podcast called Successfully Chaotic, and that is named, very well for my own life. My life has definitely been chaos. And I always tell people that, everybody has chaos. Everybody's kind of flavor, brand of chaos is a little bit different, but we all have it. Right. So I'm going to share a little bit of my story, and you'll see that my chaos has been kind of a little more flavorful maybe than others, but, the idea is just going ahead and trying to press forward, because when you're in those low moments, I always explain it kind of like a fog. You're somewhere, in some state on some road, there's this thick fog, but you can't really see clearly where you're supposed to go. And honestly, you don't really need to start barreling forward to try to figure it out, which is what I did. I pressed forward, and it's good to press forward. But one of the biggest things is if you don't have a clear direction, you haven't got your bearings, figured out where you need to go, that pressing forward without a plan, without kind of a target, can be detrimental. Again, going kind of backwards, way back, I, suffered sexual abuse, not one time, but several times by several different people over the course of my youth. And that does a lot of things to people, honestly. It makes you question your value, makes you question your entire life, makes you question, just everything. And it sets this foundation. When we think of setting a foundation, we think of something that's strong and firm and, ready to build upon. Well, unfortunately, when you go through something like that, it sets a foundation, but it's not really the type of foundation you really even know how to start to build anything upon. So, your life becomes very much a case of just protection and reaction, because, your trust is completely gone. You trust no one. So, I went through a lot of my life just with almost this chip on my shoulder of, I trusted nobody. I didn't need anybody, and it kind of it put me in a place of making decisions that I probably would not have made, honestly, if I had been able to think straight. I don't have a story where I got into drugs or went to prison or anything like that. Instead, I jumped into relationship after relationship. So, after all that happened, I ended up with a pretty steady boyfriend, because I found out many years later that I had codependency issues. I didn't even know that was a term at the time, but I was too terrified to be by myself, so attached myself to my current boyfriend at the time. And when he decided to leave, I didn't even know what to do, because I had literally attached everything to him, attached myself to my now ex-husband. And we ended up having 4 children together, and we ended up divorced. yet again, I attached myself to yet another man, ended up married again, and I'll have a total of 7 children now. So, only reason I'm kind of laying that out there is because I never did do the therapy thing. I never did, really get to the source of what my true hurts and fears and everything was, which at the very end of the day was I feared not being in control. I feared trusting anybody. I would give my trust to one person, which at the was, my boyfriend, my ex-husband, my current husband, but I would give my trust to nobody else. I, I ended up really pouring my idea of happiness into just making that other person happy. And, there's a lot of women and men out there that, kind of fall into that same thing. You hear of people always getting into these relationships, and they really get into that relationship because it's their lifeline. Honestly, that's what it is. They don't know how to make themselves happy. So they try to make that other person happy. And then, that makes them happy instead of really figuring out, okay, what do I need to do to make myself happy? And then I can go find a person if I choose to be with a person, and then we can make each other happy. I didn't have that good, healthy balance because I didn't know to have it. Honestly, I'd never, seen a good example of it. I grew up super poor too, which, a lot of people grow up poor, but, it just still adds to things. A lot of things kind of add up. And I always explain it kind of like, you can have a leaky sink, with a drip of water. Not a big deal, drip of water, but what if that sink is also clogged? The sink's clogged, the drips of water are going into the sink. Eventually that sink's still going to overflow. So, if you have 1 or 2 drops, 5 or 6 drops, whatever, it's probably not going to be a big issue. But if you keep getting drips of water in that sink, if it's a clogged drain, it's eventually going to overflow and cause a big problem, big mess. So, in essence, lots of things in my life, like a lot of other people's lives, have all kind of added up to, when you make decisions without fully thinking of, the decisions, sometimes I can lead you down paths you just don't want to go. And I've been pretty lucky overall, honestly. I mean, I know saying that I've been through sexual abuse and I grew up poor and like all these other things, and I could tell story after story to kind of add on to that. I still feel like I'm lucky because even though I was making these not super thoughtful decisions, I never did get myself into a situation that I wasn't able to get myself out of, which I'm thankful for, because like I've met lots of people that's not the case. I say all this just because I want to kind of lay it out to say another example of kind of, I guess it was stressful situation. I'm trying to think of how to word it because I have an 11-year-old who's autistic. He's with my second husband. That was my first child with my second husband. So child number 5, had 4 children coming into my second marriage. And I want to go and throw it out there too, that we had known each other for 6 months. Back to codependent. When I say some of this stuff in reverse, like as of right now, it's actually, it seems so stupid. Like it really does. But at the time, I'm divorced. I have 4 kids. I, again, have never established how to make myself happy. I meet this guy, perfect guy, says all the right things. He wants to get married. Wow, of course, it's like, it's every girl's dream, right? It's a fairy tale, right? Oh, Prince Charming, come to save me. To see, that's the thing. Relationships are complicated. Relationships are so complicated. And we don't think about how complicated they actually are because, in essence, we're taking this half-broken person, this half-broken person, shoving them together under one roof. And, you add in the fact that we really didn't know each other. I mean, how well can you know each other in 6 months? I mean, honestly, you can't. So we didn't really know each other. Then we had this ready-made family of 4 children that I was bringing to the table from a broken home, because, their dad were divorced. So, that's a lot of messiness and moving parts to try to shove into, a household. Not to mention that my husband was ex-special ops. So PTSD was rampant. And he, again, was a lot like me, stubborn. I don't need therapy. I'll press forward. I'll get through it type of thing. And, we did for a while. You don't think about things because a lot of times you're going through the motions. I'm super fertile. I mentioned I have 7 kids. I'm super fertile. Like we high-fived and I was pregnant. Our first child together is on the autism spectrum. And, I'm kind of saying that only to say that even though I love him, I would not change having him. He's made my life so much better. He's taught me literally so much about life. That's a stress. it's a stress. You have, I mean, adding a new child at all is a stress. Even if you love them, they're really cute and pudgy and you want to pinch their cheeks, is a stress, right? So, I have the 4 kids from the broken home, new marriage with this dude that I didn't know for long enough to really be married to him. We have this child that's autistic. It starts to, again, layer these levels of stress, right? I just press forward because that's what I do. I shove the crap under the rug type of person. That's how I was raised, honestly. And I think a lot of people that I've talked to anyway are like that. It's like, it's not a big deal. We'll push on. It's not a big deal. We'll push on. But again, going back to that analogy to the drips in the sink, eventually it's all going to come to a head, right? It's all going to overflow. So,
well, it's part of the stigma, really,
it is.
of going through abuse. People don't want to talk about it. They don't want to acknowledge it. And maybe that's something that you felt yourself, but those around you who maybe were cognizant of the issues that you had, they too place their stigma upon you because that's, oh, I don't want to talk about that. And so it becomes very difficult for somebody who has endured any type of abuse to really be able to move forward because they can't get past that one. That's a pretty major roadblock to get past.
It most definitely is. And it really, without you even realizing it, it affects every decision you make. Like I don't recall ever thinking, oh, my trauma that I went through is affecting this decision. But looking back, it did. It literally affected every decision that I made. It's really funny that, especially from like, I don't know, my late 20s, like mid to late 20s on, professionally, I started kind of separating my life into two, right? So my personal life is like I never could get my footing. Like it's like I never did do well at my personal life. And I never did deal with the trauma, first of all, which was the first problem. And then I just kept latching on to some guy to make me happy, second problem, and I just had all this mess that I kept trying to quote unquote fix, but really I was just kind of, masking it. And I never could quite get this footing. So what I did was I thought, well, I just need to press forward in my professional life, really start just hitting it hard in my professional life. And, that worked for a while. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, it did. I could be work Maria and I was in control. I had to get control of my, work life, my business, my everything. I could go through the motions. I could wear this mask of perfection and be okay, right? I mean, it worked for a while, but, my personal life was still a complete hot mess. There was moments early on, when Cade, which is my 11-year-old's autistic, when he was younger, it's like people don't talk about the things that goes on when you have a special needs kid. I mean, you hear about all the, the support and all that kind of stuff, and there is lots of people out there that support. But there's also, again, a stigma even with families with special needs kids. It's a very isolating thing to go through. You have this special needs child.
Absolutely.
It is. And it's people don't talk about that a lot. They don't talk about the fact that you quit getting invited to family functions because it's like, okay, well, he can't eat gluten and he can't be around this and he gets stimulated if you have this going on. So, it's not that
people tend to focus on the limitation other than the what can be added by bringing those ones into the mix and the joy that can be had by having
absolutely.
them.
And I mean, you have to kind of take a step back and look at perspective base. They're probably afraid if they do the wrong thing or have the wrong food or whatever, that's going to cause this big problem. So, it's easier not to include, and it's isolating. You quit getting invited to family functions, birthday parties, whatever. And, that's sad enough for the child that is autistic, but it's really sad for the siblings, especially when the siblings are used to doing all these things and all of a sudden there's nothing that they get to do anymore because everything has to include this filter of having this, autistic child. It's, oh, Mom, we would really love to go here. Oh, I know, but see, Cade won't do well there because there's too many lights, or, oh, Mom, we would really love to go here. We couldn't go on vacation. We couldn't, I mean, there were so many things, especially when he was younger. He's 11 now, so he does a lot better now, but when he was younger, he just couldn't do it. I mean, we had to be home. And I can remember one time we thought, well, what about camping?
Sure, yeah.
If we're camping, we're away from everybody. If he starts having a meltdown, it won't be a big deal because, that's the thing. You're always trying to think, about what's going on everywhere with everybody.
Right. You have to plan ahead.
Yeah. It's just how it goes. So I remember we took him camping. He was about 18 months old. That did not go well. That was the last trip that we went on up until about 3 years ago. Last trip we went on, because it was a complete meltdown the entire time. He loved it during the day. He was super excited. We were outside and hiking and doing things. It came to nighttime. He wanted to be in his bed. So he's like freaking out and in the tent, and it was just a hot mess. So, I mean, it's little things like that you don't think about that starts to add layers of stress to an already stressed, Maria, me, having dealt with trauma my whole life that I'd shoved under the rug, stress to my husband, who had his own traumas of, you know, of being, left with his grandparents by his parents when they got divorced, of, going into, the military, doing special ops and all the stuff that he had to endure there, losing people, all that. So, he had his own trauma he built, brought to the table. And then, as a parent, you want to make your children happy. And, my 4 children obviously was my biological children, but my husband has always treated them like they're his biological children too. Even though my ex-husband is very involved in their life, they just have always had 2 dads. So, you know, whenever you see your children hurting, that again adds more stress. You're trying to figure out how to help this child that, has all these special needs, again, stress. Isolation from family, stress. No support system, stress. It
Right.
stresses the marriage, it stresses the family unit, it stresses the individual. So again, if you don't start to deal with those things when they kind of turn on that warning light, it will come out eventually. And we didn't deal with it. We just kind of pressed forward thinking that there was like an end to this endless tunnel, which there wasn't, but we kept thinking there was, you know?
Right, right. Well, I think that's
Yeah.
the reaction of most people is that, we talked about earlier about
Yeah.
just sweeping it under the rug. We're just going to keep, because, unfortunately, most people, and a lot of times I say this about men, and I being one of those men, we're not typically open
Yeah.
with all of our feelings. We don't want to talk about it. Oh, we can push it off. It'll be fine. We'll be okay. And I think a lot of times what happens is that you have situations like some of the things that you've gone through, those things weren't properly addressed. You swept them under, and you went on to the next thing, which also then you, like you said,
Yep.
added the next level of stress, which makes it more and more difficult to appropriately take care of things. And so what you end up with is a perfectly imperfect mashup of issues.
Absolutely.
um
Well, and they come out, and that's what I try to tell everybody now. You may think you're pushing them back and just pressing on. I mean, honestly, if you would have asked me even 5 years ago, I would have been like, oh, that's in the past. I want to focus on forward, which that's the name of our podcast, which is great. But here's the thing: you can focus on forward, and that gets you going forward in the motions, and that is definitely the thing you want to. You don't want to just stand stagnant. I'm not ever going to say stand stagnant and just wait until quote unquote this magical healing happens. That's definitely not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is, it doesn't matter how fast you're running, it's going to catch up. You know what I mean? It's going to be there, it's going to catch up, and it's going to rear its ugly head probably when you least expect it. And for me, it literally came to this catalyst moment. Me and my husband actually hit this moment at the same time. I tell people, I've been divorced once, almost twice, because that was true. Back in 2018, my husband, I mean, his PTSD, that's the weird thing about PTSD is you never know when it's going to come out. And I was under a lot of stress. He was under a
what's
lot of
going to
stress.
trigger it?
Oh,
Yeah.
exactly. And, he started having a lot of issues, but sadly at the same time I was too. And that's the thing, when you're both drowning, you can't help each other. If it had been a year before or whatever, I would have been in a lot better place to try to help hold him up. But my grandparents, which I was super close with, they helped raise me. They both passed away early 2018 within 6 weeks of each other. Was unexpected. And it and then my great grandma, which was the only grandparent I had left at that point, passed 2 weeks later. So I went from having 3 living grandparents to 0 within an 8-week period of time. So that was kind of the beginning of kind of the snowball of me falling to pieces, because again, I have all these kids, I have, businesses, I have things that I'm responsible for. I didn't have time to properly mourn. I had to just, deal with what I needed to deal with the funerals, deal with what I needed to deal with their estate, to just deal with it and move on and not deal with it. But, the problem is, again, is we all deal with stress a little differently. I tend to deal with stress by getting super quiet and withdrawing, because if I feel a little bit of it, I feel it all. And, when you've been holding back this like tidal wave for, 40 years, feeling it all is not an option, or I felt like it was not an option. So I just kept pushing it back. Well, my husband took that as a I guess, indicator that I was pulling away from him, which was not the case. I was pulling away from life. I was trying to deal with myself. So that's actually what started him having a lot of his PTSD issues. He kept thinking I was going to leave him because he had abandonment issues. He had been abandoned before. So
Yeah,
that
that would do it.
it would. So he kept thinking that me withdrawing was him, and it wasn't. It was me trying to keep all of this stuff that I've been bottling up so long, that was festering on the surface, about ready to explode, just in, because I didn't know how to deal with it at that moment. I was so busy and so overwhelmed. I just couldn't. And
Yeah,
unfortunately,
you were basically trying to hold back a tidal wave with a screen door.
it was. I mean, and that's, that's what it felt like. But, again, in retrospect, I love retrospect. Isn't it so great when you look back and it's like, I should have, I should have at that moment called a
Shoulda,
therapist.
woulda, coulda.
Exactly. We should have both, called, a therapist separately, called a therapist together, and going ahead and made those a priority, because, it forced our hand. My husband, started having such bad PTSD issues that it got to an abusive point. Um, and that wasn't him. That, it was, I kept telling him he was like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He was my husband one moment, and then he was somebody else the next moment.
Until that switch flipped.
Yep. And, it's a really tough place to be in when you're also dealing with all of this internal stuff. You're dealing with trying, like you mentioned, trying to hold back this tidal wave. You're dealing with trying to deal with the day-to-day, business ownership, clients, your children, just all of this stuff. And I don't know which man I have at that moment. And then it could switch at any moment. And, that was terrible. It really was. And it caused me to withdraw even more. It caused me to push into my work even more, because work was my escape, which, again, in retrospect, fueled the flame even more. So here I am, I'm trying to deal with it. I'm withdrawing, pushing into my job. He's having his fears that I was going to leave, which we didn't know that until later, that that's what caused it. But that was, what a lot of the triggers were. So it's like we were literally fueling each other. The more he would push, the more I would pull, the more I would pull, the more he would push. And we were in this, I guess, war, this battle that neither of us was going to win. He ended up having to go into a institution for 7 days because of his PTSD. And I was left trying to figure out what the heck I was going to do, because it's like, when you go through that stuff, again, I had trust issues. So this created a whole nother level of trust issues under my own roof, right? So it's like, okay, what's the decision? What do I do? And, honestly, I didn't even know. I ended up filing for divorce, because at that moment, I couldn't deal with it. We ended up going, it was May of 2019. We ended up both going to counseling. At the time, it was going to be just to, deal with what we needed to deal with, enough to be able to co-parent our children. Because again, we have 3 children together, 4 from my first marriage, so 7 total, and then the one is special needs. So, what does this look like? How do we do this? What are we supposed to do? So what ended up being, just us going to counseling to try to co-parent properly, ended up being us being sent to separate therapists, like we should have done the entire time, being, sent to deal with our own stuff. And once we figured out that we were dealing with our own stuff, and we were going to these co-counseling to be able to help co-parent, we started figuring out that a lot of these problems, weren't as irreparable as we thought they were. And I always disclaimer myself to say that, if you're in an abusive situation, there is nothing that says that you should ever have to work things out. My husband had to do the work. He had to do the work to figure out what was causing that, because yes, there's lots of whys for why he got to that level. Lots of understandable whys. If you knew a lot of his story, it would be like, wow, okay, I completely understand that. But at the same time, that's never an excuse, and how to get to the point where I believed that he knew that that wasn't an excuse before I could start to trust him again. And, there's still certain things that are off limits, even now. I mean, there's still certain topics off limits. There's still, certain boundaries that I have in place that honestly, I'll probably always have in place. We were able to save our marriage. We still go to counseling.
Excellent.
But we were able to fix it. It's, there are times where it's able to be fixed. Um, you know, he did some terrible bad things and hurt me in a lot of ways, but he's not a terrible bad person. And I think that's something to really realize with people. That, again, that doesn't mean that you ever have to work it out with somebody. There's a million reasons that I shouldn't have, and I didn't have to, and I didn't have to, but it was the best decision for us. We felt that it was the best decision, for us to kind of move forward in that way. On my work side, I actually had to create a balance for myself because work was my escape. And, it's okay to have an escape as long as it's on a healthy level, but it was an escape to the level of hiding from my personal life. So, people are like, oh my gosh, how did you do it? How are you so successful? I'm like, well, that was my escape. So every time that I felt stressful in my personal life, I would push into business.
Right. You go bury yourself over there.
It would. And, again, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be successful. There's nothing wrong with having goals and dreams and being driven. I'm a driven person. I like being a driven person, but, it's always important to know that you have to take a step back, look at your entire life as a whole and say, okay, number one, why am I doing this? What's the reasons? Because working hard at a goal because I have the goal and I want to achieve something, that's a great thing. Working really hard at a goal because there's something going on in my personal life that I'm ignoring and I don't know how to deal with, so I'm not dealing with it, not so good of a reason, right? It's just setting up a problem for later on down the road. And I think it's important to say that because I've seen a lot of people do that. A lot of people hide from their personal life because, we all want to feel in control of our life, right? We all want to feel like we're in the driver's seat, and that's a good thing. We do. I get that. But, you're not going to actually be in control of your life if you're hiding from a portion of your life. So, and,
Agreed. Yeah.
It's just I see that happen over and over and over. So, honestly, I can, with my podcast being called Successfully Chaotic, the name of it actually came from a speaking engagement that I've been doing titled the same thing. I entitled it Successfully Chaotic because I would share, just a very brief, cliff notes of, going through trauma, going through stress, going through whatever. And that I, had to figure out and how to define my own definition of success, because part of my problem, I think, because, I never grew up with money. So my idea of the success was always linked to this title, this car, this house, this dollar amount in my bank account, right? Because I thought my life was so chaotic. It was so crazy. It was so, to me, awful that I thought that if I had that, then it would be good, right? Because if you have the money, you can do whatever. Well, the problem is that doesn't equate happiness. That doesn't equate health. That doesn't equate mental stability. That doesn't equate any of those things. That just means you might be able to go buy something. That's not going to make you happy anyway. So, I mean, that was the biggest thing. When I reached that point of making what I thought was a successful amount of money, what I thought was a successful title, I wasn't happy. I was miserable. I actually started to feel less in control because, when you have that goal in mind, it's like, well, when I get there, then everything will be okay.
Right.
And it wasn't. I started losing my footing.
Yeah. A lot of people don't realize that it's okay and it's healthy to have goals and aspirations and things that you want to do. But when you lose control of the work-life balance, one overrides the other.
Yep.
There's always going to be an issue. You're either going to alienate your family, or you're going to alienate your need for work and to take care of those things. There's a delicate balance there, and if we slide one way too far in any direction, it's unhealthy. So yeah, that's a very much needed thing in all of our lives, because if we're going to be focused on forward, if we're going to have a good view of how to move ourselves forward in life, it has to come from a balanced position. You can't feed somebody if you have an empty cupboard. Yeah. You can't take care of other people if you have an empty soul. So you have to take care of those things in order to be able to move forward. So how are we doing with the work-life balance now?
It's good. I mean, honestly, I describe work-life balance as this like giant balloon game. Did you ever play a balloon game as a kid where you just have all these balloons in the air and you're just trying to keep them
Oh
from
yeah,
hitting the
keep
ground?
try to keep them floating. Yeah.
That is work-life balance, because that's another thing. I love Pinterest, don't get me wrong, I love Pinterest, but I tried to Pinterest myself into work-life balance and thought that there was this like magical 50-50 work-life balance that was out there, waiting if I had the right Pinterest board available and I followed all the steps and checked all the boxes. And I mean, it just, that's not how it works, right? So Pinterest is great, but it will screw you up if you try to go ahead and follow it to that extent. So you have to figure out what works in your life. And I think that's what kind of really, when I say define your own success, if you equate it to being able to buy a Ferrari, whatever. I'm not saying don't buy that stuff, don't make the money. I'm saying don't wrap up your idea of happiness into somebody else's definition of success. I'm saying, figure out what makes you happy. Because right now, I know what makes me happy. Freedom makes me happy. Being able to make my own decisions makes me happy. Being able to say, you know what, today I don't feel like working because, my 15-year-old decides she needs some mom time. I can tell because she's got a bad attitude. So I'm wiping my calendar and I'm focusing on her.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. And now back to Focused on Forward.
I'm at a place now that I can completely do that because I own my own business. I run my own life. And to me, that is far more successful than what I had ever thought success was before. And I think, for a lot of people, they're still chasing this idea, and I see a lot of this stuff like the hashtag hustle, the hashtag grind, and, all this stuff. And it's great. There's nothing wrong with it, again. But sometimes you can get wrapped up in the hustle and grind mentality. You have no idea what you're hustling for and why. You have no idea what you're grinding for and why. You're just doing it. You're going through the motions because you got the Pinterest board that you're checking off, thinking that that's going to make it happen. And again, Pinterest is great. Checklist great, goals are great. I mean, you could see me, what people that are listening can't, but behind me, I've got my whole Kanban board of stuff. I like my lists. I like my stuff going on. I like to know what's going on. I like planning. But all in all, you have to figure out, what works for you, what works within your life of success. The going back to the work-life balance and the balloon game, what balloons do you want in the air? Because if, there's no way you can keep a million balloons from hitting the ground, right? It's not a feasible action. So you choose what balloons go in your balloon game, AKA your life, and you choose what you need to focus on at any time. Because, what's going to happen is if you start to focus a little more on work, which happens because you get busy, clients need you, new projects, whatever, you start to notice that the family balloons start sinking just a little bit, right? But when you see that, it's time to turn and focus on the family balloons, pop them back up in the air again, start focusing on that. And then you'll notice the business balloons start, sinking again. That, to me, that is work-life balance. It is never going to be this 50-50 thing to where it all just equals out perfectly. It is always going to be this idea that you're always trying to just keep the balloons from hitting the ground. And I think understanding that is so important for people, especially if you are, managing, a family, children, the more balloons you put in the game, the harder it is to keep them up in the air, right? So, you add all those things in there. The idea is just to keep them afloat. And that's good enough because you can put so much pressure on yourself for this perfection, this idea that you're going to have it all perfect, all balanced, all, Pinterest perfect and ready, curated, that you're going to drive yourself completely insane. And I think, I don't, I've not been a man before, so I can't say how men feel, but I know from a woman's standpoint, I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to have the perfect everything, the perfect house, the perfect kids that are always clean and neatly dressed, perfect, everything, be dressed nice, be this, be that. You can put so much pressure on yourself that you will drive yourself completely insane because it is impossible. And all of these beautiful Instagram accounts that you see, I guarantee you that not everything that they have is like that. And I think that's what made me go ahead and come out with the idea, like my own branding is not curated and perfect. Half the time I come on my live shows looking like a hot mess because I decided a long time ago that I'm going to show up as I am. Sometimes I'll look cute and I had time to fix my hair and put some makeup on. And, sometimes my house is clean, but sometimes it's just like my goal is to just not let it be nasty because I hadn't had time to, fully clean it. It's not going to be Pinterest worthy every single day. It has its moments to shine, but it's not every single day. So I think showing those moments, I think is so important for me, for my brand. My brand is real, raw, and authentic. For my brand, I wanted to be that person out there saying, you can have a not perfect life. You can have a successfully chaotic life. You can define your own idea of success. You can take whatever chaos flavor that's in your life and make it into something. Use it as a catalyst. It can happen. You don't have to sit and wait back for things to be perfect or to wait for this destination to happen or that destination to happen. Because I think people do that. And I did that. I kept, I would look
Oh,
online
everybody
and
does.
they do. It's just like, well, when I get here, then when I
Then I'll
get
be
here,
happy.
then
Then I can
yeah,
do this. And then I'll be okay. And the thing too about those Instagram pictures and the Facebook pictures and Twitter pictures and all this stuff, they're great. They're fine. They're wonderful. But you also have to remember how many takes did they have to take to
absolutely.
find that one picture? Did they, how many filters did they go through to find the prettiest way to pose it? That house that's all perfectly staged. How many hours of cleaning did it take? How unhappy was the family who couldn't go into that room and use it?
Mm-hmm.
And I've often, because we have 3 kids and 2 dogs and 2 cats, and
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a partridge in a pear tree somewhere if we look hard enough. But I've always said that I would rather have a lived-in home than
Yep.
a perfect home. And because there's a difference between a lived-in home and a dirty home.
Exactly.
If for those who are listening who have kids and animals and all that, the accoutrements that come with those 2 and 4-legged creatures, um, there's a bit of chaos that goes with that. And I think you actually add more stress and instability in your life by trying to keep everything perfect, trying to keep up appearances and trying to, so I'm not saying you steer into the skid and you just go for the dump house. I'm saying, just, let it be lived in, let it be happy where it's at. So, but yeah, you got some really good points here. And Maria, I think your approach to the balloon game of life, I think it's a healthy approach. And I think if people adopt that, that's probably a good way to go, because there's never going to be a perfect 50-50 balance in anything that we do in life.
Absolutely not.
And I think that, part of that is because people forget that we are all imperfect human beings. There's
Mm-hmm.
not one of us who does anything absolutely perfect every single time. And so if you're trying to find a perfect balance or a perfect place or a perfect thing, well, you're already set yourself up for failure.
Absolutely.
And so that's one of the biggest issues. So let's talk about now. We've listened to you for the past few minutes, and all the things that you've gone through, how you've moved past them, and not that you've moved past them. We all have to deal with them. There's still things that are going to affect you from day to day, clearly, because that's not how the human brain works. It's not just that one day we go, oh, okay, well, we're done with this.
I'm healed.
I'm healed. Everything's fine. Look at me go.
Yep.
That's not how the brain works. But let's look back at some of these things. Each of them gives us a life lesson.
Mm-hmm.
So looking back on the story of Maria Daniels, what is the greatest life lesson that you have learned?
To really tap into my own strength. Again, I latched on to somebody else, whether it was, boyfriend, husband, whatever, even my kids. I used my kids as sources of happiness. I never knew how to be happy just being me. I never knew how to make myself happy. I had to be doing something for someone else. And then their happiness, I would absorb as my happiness, right? So I think, that's the biggest lesson, honestly. If I could kind of go back to younger me, I would teach myself the fact that I need to make myself happy because, that old saying that, pour from an empty cup, I had read that way before I realized that I was a miserable human being that was just like sucking in other people's happiness as my own. But, it didn't really resonate with me because I didn't understand, the saying that, things in the rear view. They seem so clear. The things that already happened, they just seem so clear, is so true, because I look back now and it seems so obvious. Like, all the stuff seems so obvious, how much I was hurting, how much I was stuffing things away, how much I didn't really know how to feel and to deal with my own emotions, so I just didn't deal with them. But yeah, I mean, I think that's what it would be, is just to tell myself that I need to figure out what makes me happy, how to make myself happy, and then I can share that with others. The idea, yeah, I'm a helper. I've always been a helper. All of my businesses, and I've got several, if you dig back to the core of every single one of them, I'm a helper. And I always want to be a helper. But there's a book, and most people, when I say this, they have no idea what I'm talking about, and that's fine. I'm going to say it anyway. You probably don't know what I'm talking about, but it really impacted me, so I'm saying it anyway. There's a book called Sin Eater, actually, and I remember when I read that book. Basic overview of the book is there's this man that lives in this village, and people go and he absorbs their sins, no matter what it is. Hatred, just terrible things. He's absorbing it, but every time he absorbs it, he gets sicker. Until he gets to the end and he dies from absorbing so many people's sins. I feel like my entire life, that's what I was. I was a sin eater. My mom would have a problem, I would fix it. My dad would have a problem, I would fix it. My sister, I was this fixer, a sin eater, and again, there's a level of that's healthy. I always want to be the helper. That's just, that's who I am. That's who I feel like I was, designed to be. But if you're not filling yourself up, if you're not figuring out, what at the core essence, your needs, if you're not putting that as a priority, eventually you're going to be like that sin eater, and you're going to take on so much that you just die.
All right. Well, that's cool. It's good that you recognize that, because I don't think a lot of people do. And I think that's what kind of keeps them on that empty balance, and that makes it harder for them to be able to move forward.
Absolutely.
All right. So here's the next question. That was part one of the questions I like to ask every guest. Here's part two.
Okay.
Looking back over the life story of Maria Daniels, what was the greatest piece of advice that you have been given?
Oh, Lord. I hate to say the same exact thing, but I feel like it goes back to the same thing of, one day when I don't remember if it was in a book or read a meme or whatever, the don't pour from an empty cup hit me different. I had seen it, I don't even know how many times before that, but one day it hit different than it did any other time before that. And I mean, call it what you will. I was ready to understand it. It was divine, whatever, call it whatever you want to call it. But one day it just hit me different that, okay,
it finally mattered in your life.
I understood it. It clicked, at that moment where it didn't before. I was like, oh, that's so good. Yeah. Don't pour from an empty cup. I could say it, but I didn't feel it. I didn't, I couldn't feel it, probably because I wasn't living it, and I didn't even realize it. But one day it just hit different. So, I mean, I guess I'm going to have to say that, because again, it doesn't matter how many wonderful, amazing things that you're doing for somebody else. Eventually your cup's going to run dry if you're not pouring into it.
All right. I'm good with that. All right. So a few minutes ago, we talked about how you came up with the name of your show, Successfully Chaotic. But let's take a minute and tell the listeners about your show. Now, we know where you got the name from, but what's the premise of the show? What do you talk about over there? What do you do? All that kind of stuff.
Okay. So Successfully Chaotic primarily was for entrepreneurs, small business owners, or even people that were wanting to be an entrepreneur, to come on and talk about their own success stories, struggles, how they found their success in the midst of chaos, right? But it's kind of, broadened a little bit to become kind of a little bit of a variety. How that happens sometimes. It's broadened because, I do have a wellness company. I'm an integrative nutritionist. I was a trainer for years. I'm an herbalist. I've got this other wellness world. And at the core of people's being, if they don't feel good, a lot of times they're not going to be good, right? So, there's so many different moving parts to a whole and happy human that, we do touch on that some, a little bit of wellness, relationships, parenting. I've had some episodes about autism because that's my life. So it's kind of become, just a broad version of the idea that, we're all layered. I'm sure you've seen Shrek. And Shrek
Onions
talks,
have
yes,
layers.
onions have layers. So there you go. I use that all the time because people also have layers, not just ogres, right? So it's kind of become this idea that, well, if even if our listener base primarily is entrepreneurs, and they are, I've done the analytics on it, they're primarily entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs have layers. They also have relationships. They also have children. They also have all these other things that dial in and affect their business, because it does. You can't completely keep it in separate compartments. And I think that's an important thing for people to know that I didn't know for the longest time. I think I mentioned earlier that I tried to keep, separate Maria lives. I had my business life that, I was all gung ho and yeah, I got this. And I had my personal life where I walked on eggshells and I felt like I was dying inside, and I had to keep them separate because that was the only way that I could cope at that moment, because I wasn't dealing with it. Right. But see, once you start to really try to heal and deal with things, it's almost impossible to keep everything completely compartmentalized. They leak out. You might try to be like, okay, well, this is and I'm all for batching. Trust me, I'm in marketing, business, consulting. Batching is great. You'll get more done. But stuff leaks over. You be batching and sending emails and your kid calls from school because they're sick. Stuff leaks over into each other. You can make the best plan possible and be on your way to that meeting. That's going to be your life-changing meeting. On the way to the babysitter, the kid projectile vomits from the back seat. Life's chaos. It just happens, right? So things are going to leak into each other. So, overall, if you are trying to just spend your time putting everything back into the proper compartment, you're going to drive yourself insane. So the idea with, kind of blending it into this kind of a variety show still dials back to making a great entrepreneurship journey, making a great business journey, because we are dealing with all levels, all layers of, the person. So, that's kind of, what we've become. And we've kind of come out now with a few new live shows where we come in niche down, and we've kind of broadened because it just organically happened. And now we're niching out with live shows, very specific and targeted, to be able to kind of, I guess, fulfill my need to be able to make sure I'm niching down. The marketing person in me is always trying to target, and it's hard to target on a broad level. So, I didn't want to change the dynamic of the show. It's working. And, even if, from a marketing level, I was to say, well, if we niche down, we can market that show better and get it, whatever. It's become what it's supposed to be, I feel, and I didn't want to mess with it. So the way to make me feel better about all that is I've decided to, I'm launching out some live shows that are, specific business, specific wellness, so we've done that.
So your show is living up to its name. It's
It is
successfully
chaotic. It is definitely successfully
That's
chaotic.
awesome. I love it. All right. Well, cool beans. Well, kids, if you're interested in hearing Maria's show, you can find it on any of your podcast destinations. You can look up for her there. Where can they find the video streams, Maria?
We do stream live to Successfully Chaotic Facebook page, Successfully Chaotic YouTube channel, and we have a Twitch channel, which I'll be honest, I have not all the way figured out Twitch. It's streaming there, but we've done nothing else with it. So if you're on there,
I'm right there with you.
It's like the button's there. I'm like, oh, well, I guess it'll
I have one.
there.
I send it there. I don't know who all's watching, but it goes there.
It's there. So it's whatever. It's one of those things that's on my list to figure out how all that works one day, but it's not on the top of the list. So
it's part of the to-dos.
Exactly. So it is there. You can listen to the podcast also on our website. We do have a website. I haven't started streaming to the website. People keep asking me that if I'm on stream to the web, that's a whole nother plug-in deal that I don't know if I want to deal with. I'll be honest, but you can go to our website, link through to the Facebook page, link through to the YouTube channel and watch them there. I'll probably just keep it like that, honestly, but it's successfullychaotic.com.
Perfect. Okay. All right. So there's a lot here to kind of wrap our head around on things that you've gone through in life and everything else. But just to kind of cap things off here, I think it's important for us each to recognize that at some point in Maria's life, counseling therapy was necessity to be able to help her to move forward. We can't move forward in our life until we have identified our issues, till we've identified the path we need to take, and we take action. Those are the 3 steps for us to be able to help ourselves heal, because those are the things that help us to help others in our life as well. So we identify our issue. We identify the path, we take the action. It's a much needed three-step process. And 2, that applies to many things that affect us, whether it's abandonment issues, whether it's PTSD, whether it's sexual abuse, whatever it may be. those things can help us. And I also just want to put this out there. If you're listening and you're unsure of how to address issues with sexual abuse, here's a phone number that you can call at any time. It's 1-800-656-HOPE. And that goes to RAIN.org. RAIN is a beautiful organization. They help people through all types of sexual trauma, whether it was rape, abuse, incest, whatever it is. They're there to help. It's a national network. You can check them out at RAINN.org. And there's a private chat there that you can have with a qualified counselor. Or again, that phone number is 1-800-656-HOPE. Please give them a call and let them help you. So Maria, thank you so much for being on Focused on Forward today. We appreciate you as a guest. And if you guys are looking for a chaotic, fun little show to listen to, I highly suggest Maria's show. I'm a subscriber. I listen, and I try to catch her on her live shows as much as possible. But she's a good watch. She's a good listen, and there's some humor thrown in there too. So I can't recommend it enough. But again, Maria, thank you for being on the show.
It was great. Thank you.
All right, guys, that's going to conclude us today for Focused on Forward. Well, that concludes another episode of Focused on Forward. To be a guest of Focused on Forward, you can reach us through Twitter at PodcastFOF, through our Facebook page named Focused on Forward, or through email focusedonforward@gmail.com. We look forward to hearing each and every one of your stories that has yet to be told. So until then, be safe, be kind, and be loving to one another as you stay focused on forward.